The Alfa Romeo Giulia has been taking the fight to strong German cars such as the BMW 3 Series and the Mercedes-Benz C-Class over the past year or so. But if you look at the sales figures, it's been failing at that quite badly. I've been spending some time with this, the Giulia 2-litre turbo super, and today I'm going to run through why I think the car is struggling in the sales market here in South Africa and basically what it's been like to live with while I've been driving it. Before we get into anything, let's just talk about this engine. It's a turbocharged 2-litre engine. This one pushes 147 kilowatts and 330 newton meters of torque, which against its competitors, it is not that much. What I do like about it is that it's fitted to a very nice 8-speed torque converter, and this transmission really squeezes out all of that power. I think that the Giulia needs more range in the lineup. So you only get this turbocharged engine and then you get the V6 in the quadrifoglio. There's no diesels, there's no higher powered petrols, but a 206 kilowatt Veloce model is coming later this year. As far as styling is concerned, I think we can all agree that the Giulia definitely is a head turner, and that's what I've experienced with my time driving it. A lot of people turn their heads when you drive past. They really like the design. Even in white, some people might think it looks basic, but on this design with these lines, it's really clean. The wheels are small. Some people prefer the bigger ones, and you can get them at an optional extra. But I prefer the smaller wheels because it really helps with the comfort of the car, especially with these Michelin premises. And it's the same story inside. You can see in true Italian fashion, they've used very clean lines. They've used the red leather and this faux wood trim. And what I've been impressed with the most is the fact that everything is still together. I mean, Italian cars have a very bad reputation of falling apart. This car, it's had a generally easy life, but it's been on a gravel road here and there. Overall, it's just a very comfortable place to be in. Everything's laid out very nicely as well. Everything's easy to reach. And what I like most of all is that this is not touchscreen. It's controlled by a good old rotary system, so you don't have to take your eyes off the road whenever you want to use that. It's really one thing to get styling and fit and finish right, but where this car really needs to impress is in the way it drives. So what's left to do now is to take it for a spin. Before we drive, let me just disclose that I think the Giulia QV is probably the most amazing experience I've had at cars. So when I was given the chance to get behind the wheel of this for a long-term test, I was very excited. And the first thing you notice when you start driving this car is that it draws so much from the QV in terms of how dynamic it is, in terms of its character, in terms of the way it feels when you drive, just obviously at a lower speed. It's very comfortable, I think mainly because it's got those smaller wheels and bigger tire profiles. I think it makes a big difference. That's why I prefer those wheels. The steering is very light and active. It's very engaging to drive. The engine sounds pretty good for a 2-litre, especially when you put it in dynamic mode. It gives it a bit of some attitude, and it just feels like a car that you can really connect with, which is an Italian cliche. Alfas have always been, very driver interactive cars, and then that's about it. I think if you are a driver in particular, this will resonate to you more than a 3 Series or a C-Class would. But unfortunately, that's sort of where the traits of the Giulia end. I mean, it's got a great cabin, the fit and finish is great, it's lasted over the year. But when you look at it on paper, there's really not much that it has to work with. This is the super trim, so you get a couple of things extra, such as the pedals, you get the leather steering wheel, the leather upholstery standard, privacy glass, odds and ends like that, the rear parking sensors as well. But it's still 670,000 Rand, and as I mentioned earlier, it's only got 147 kilowatts, and when you weigh that in next to cars like the 330i and the C300, this car is actually really underpowered, and it's not that great value, because when you look at the spec of those cars as well, it's got more or less the same options as this does. So personally, I think it's mainly because of brand perception. Alfa does not have a very strong reputation in South Africa. Secondly, I think it's just marketing. You don't see any adverts for the Giulia, or I don't at least. When you're driving about, billboards aren't being placed, there's no radio adverts aren't being heard too frequently, and I understand they don't have a big budget like the Germans do. The service experience that I had at Century City, it was great. The guys were very friendly, but there were some drawbacks. So I couldn't get a booking as soon as I wanted to. I had to wait about 5 to 6 weeks. Another thing is, The parking sensors on this car are absolutely mental. They are crazy. I don't know why, but if you're sitting in traffic or if you're moving about in a parking lot, the parking sensors will tell you that there's something right in your bonnet when there's nothing in front of you at all. And when I told the dealership about this, their recommendation was that I just turn the parking sensors off. And that's really something you cannot say to someone who currently owns a 3 Series or has previously owned a C-Class or a 3 Series. They will not take it. Daily driving, this car isn't the most fuel efficient. It uses about 11 litres to 100 k's, 10 litres to 100 k's, but on the long road it balanced out at just under 7 litres per 100 k's, which means we were able to get a range of 800 k's out of the tank, which is phenomenal. The adaptive cruise control came in very handy. It's not the most intelligent one. What I find is it works in a very linear system, so if a car is changing lanes, it won't pick it up until it's directly in front of you, and for obvious reasons that is extremely dangerous. It's also a bit delayed, so if you try and overtake in the fast lane, you have to put your foot down. That's because, again, of the linear thing, it will track someone as being in front of it until it's completely clear. And the problem with that is once you get into the fast lane and you need to accelerate, there's cars coming behind you, this car isn't moving, so you got to put your foot down, which kind of ruins the point of adaptive cruise control for me. In a straight line though, there were no problems. It detected cars in front of it every single time, so there wasn't a case of me thinking, okay, wait, I'm going to go into the back of this car. However, using it in suburban areas and let's say maybe areas with a couple of high rises here and there were instances where it didn't pick the car up, and also it had an issue with cars stopping at traffic lights for some reason. There were once or twice you had to intervene because you knew, okay, I'm not stopping, this car's going into the back of someone's Hilux. On the long road though, I don't know what it was because there were many cars in front of me and it was just a crazy road, as some of you would know. Something was kicked up under from the car in front of me, and I think it was possibly a truck tire because it left a bit of a smudge on the bumper. But not only that, it took out the protection plate from beneath the car, and with it, it took out a plug that disconnected the car's electric power steering, the adaptive cruise control, the electronic stability control, the lane departure detection, and a couple of other safety features. But yeah, overall my experience with the Giulia has been great. I wouldn't consider myself an Alfa fan. I mean, I like the classic Alfas. I think it's always a dream of mine to own a GT Junior. Whenever I brought up the name Alfa Romeo to my mother, she would tell me about how her father owned one, my grandfather. And my grandfather's someone that I've never really met. He died when I was 4 months old. And she remembers vividly a trip that they did from Durban to Port Elizabeth, and they weren't able to complete it because their car had broken down in true classic Alfa fashion. So the opportunity to get to drive an Alfa to Port Elizabeth without it breaking down, almost, and I really hate to get sentimental here, but it connected me with my grandfather in a way that no other car has before. And he was a huge car nut. He owned a couple of Chevs, a couple of Mercs, but the one car that stood up for my mother was his Alfa Romeo. Spending time with the Giulia over a long period of time has been a unique and entertaining experience, and from what I can tell, it definitely has what it takes to be a serious contender, but unfortunately, because of stuff like pricing and brand perception in South Africa, it's really unlikely to do that well, which is disappointing because there's a lot of potential here, and they really have made a good car with the resources that they've got. I think that Alfa needs to direct their products more towards a younger audience, because those seem to be people who are interested in the brand. If you look at the success of cars like the 147, regardless, I think it's going to be very interesting to see Alfa's strategy in South Africa, because the way it looks now, it's not very strong, and something needs to be done soon if they're going to survive here in SA.